This video gives an overview of Windographer's data flagging capabilities. Now, flagging is our approach to quality control, and conceptually, it's as simple as anything. It's just a way to categorize data. And I'll show you what I mean starting in the Flag Manually window. And let's pretend that there's something about this piece of wind speed data that I want to indicate as suspicious. I can do that by applying a flag called suspect to this data segment. I just categorized that particular time slice of this one data column. I haven't deleted the segment or harmed the data set in any way. I haven't even removed any information. I just highlighted one segment as special. These little bubbles appear in the time series graph to indicate the flag state of the data points. Different flags can have different colors, so if I choose some other flag and apply it, I should see a second color. You can create as many flags as you wish and give them whatever names and colors you wish. You can overlap flagged segments like this, and flag multiple data columns at once, like this, or unflag a segment, like this. And you can select a segment on the graph as we've already seen, or in the table as you wish. So I can step through and flag the obvious problems like this event, which looks like an icing event to me. The anemometers all stopped spinning pretty abruptly, the wind vanes froze solid, and everything stayed still for a couple of days until the temperature rose above zero. So I'll apply the icing flag to all these wind speed data columns, and I'll include the wind vanes as well, because they're frozen stiff. Now when I apply that flag, all those data columns get flagged, and their associated columns get flagged as well, like these wind speed standard deviation columns. I should see flags on them as well. And if this data set contained min and max speed columns and min and max direction columns, they would have been flagged as well. I could do all my flagging in this window, and some of our users do that, but Windographer provides other ways to flag data, ways that work better for some kinds of problems, like these temperature and RH values of -999, for example. That almost certainly means missing data or sensor error or something. You've probably seen that kind of thing in your own data files. I could select and flag those segments here, but I'd rather just tell Windographer to search for all values of -999 and flag them as invalid. In fact, we'll do that in a minute. Or say I'm concerned about the relative behavior of certain data columns, like here, where the 80-meter wind speeds drop below the 40-meter wind speeds. That's fishy, right? Well, the flag by scatterplot window works well for that kind of thing. It gives you another way to flag data manually. Here I can plot any data column versus any other data column. And if I think it's fishy that the 80-meter speed could be below the 40-meter speed, I can select those fishy points and flag them as fishy. I can choose a rectangle or a freehand shape instead and apply some other flag and select some more. And click Alt-F, that's the keyboard shortcut to flag. Now, you'll do this a whole lot more carefully than I'm doing it, but you get the idea. Okay, well, enough manual flagging for now. Let's look at a faster way. With a flag rule, you can tell Windographer to search the whole data set and under certain circumstances, apply a certain flag to certain data columns. You create and execute flag rules in this Flag with Rules window. This list is empty right now because I haven't created any rules yet. So I'll create a rule and give it a name. And I'll say look for temperature values equal to -999. And when you find them, apply the invalid flag to the temperature column. That's a perfectly good flag rule. Look for temperatures of -999 and flag them as invalid. But remember, we saw -999s in the relative humidity data as well, not just temperature data. So really, I'd like to flag -999 values in any data column, whether temperature, RH, or anything else. Well, I can do that by switching from using data column names to data column types. Now I can search for something in any wind speed column, or any wind direction column, any quality column, and so on. So I'll tell it to search for any data column being equal to -999, and when it finds a value like that, flag the relevant data column, and that just means the one in which we found the -999 value. I'll say OK to that. So there's my new rule. When I execute it, Windographer goes through the data set from start to finish, looking for the time steps that meet our search criteria. And in those time steps, it applies the flag we specified to the data columns we specified. Here it reports that it flagged 2,500 data points. I'm going to click OK and take a look at the time series graph. The bubbles show suspect, icing, invalid data points. Now, I'd prefer these invalid values to disappear entirely from the graph because they're messing up my y-axis. So I'm going to go to the Define Flags window where I can add or rename or change colors. I'm going to make values flagged as invalid disappear from the time series graph. So now the other flags still appear in the graph and the legend, but the invalid data disappears. It's still there, it just doesn't appear in the time series graph. Okay, there's one more window that applies flags. This one is specific to the problem of tower shading. That's where an anemometer is shaded by the tower whenever it's downwind of the tower. Now, I could write my own flag rules to catch tower shading, but this window can write them for me because it can automatically detect the shading pattern in two co-located anemometers. Let's look at the 40-meter pair, for example. Windographer calculates the ratio of those two 40-meter anemometers in every time step, and it plots those ratios here versus direction. I like the Cartesian graph here, but that's just me. This scatter plot shows a bit of a pattern, but this plot shows a really clear pattern. This is the median ratio versus direction sector. The ratio of A to B is very low where A is shaded here, and very high where B is shaded here. So it detects the shading pattern, and then it writes flag rules to flag the affected data points. This rule, for example, says to apply the tower shading flag to speed 40 meter A, where the direction is in the range of 150 to 180 degrees. That's this section here. So it writes 4 rules in all, 1 for each anemometer. When I click Execute Flag Rules, it steps through the dataset from start to finish, just like it did when we executed our own rule. And then in the time series graph, we see lots of tower shading events. They show up as these pink bubbles, lots of them. So we flagged thousands of data points in 4 different ways. And we've seen one result of applying flags, which is the appearance in the time series graphs of these little bubbles. But there's a much more important result than that, which is the ability to filter by flag. That's the real reason to do the work of flagging. Almost everywhere you look in Windographer, you see this set of filter controls where I can filter by date, direction, and other things. But I can also filter by flag using this set of checkboxes. One checkbox appears for each flag that I have applied to this data set. If I want this windrows to include data flagged with the icing flag, I can check icing. Otherwise, I uncheck it, and the graph changes right away. The ice data is in, out, in. It's the same thing for data flagged as suspect and as tower shading. On the diurnal profile tab, we see the same checkboxes, and the graph behaves just the same. Same thing on the histogram tab. Same thing on almost all of the analysis windows. When I plot wind shear, I can include or exclude that suspect data. The initial state of these checkboxes depends on the properties of the flag. Remember this list of flags? Each flag has a property indicating whether to include or exclude data flagged with that flag by default. Icing, invalid, and tower shading are excluded by default, but suspect is included by default. That's why this suspect checkbox starts out checked and the others start out unchecked. I can override the default very easily. I just check the box, but those flag properties set the initial state of the checkboxes. In the export data window, once again, we see a checkbox for each flag, and the preview down below updates in real time as I make changes. Some of these first few time steps are flagged as tower shading, so when I exclude tower shading data, we see more gaps in the export file. That's when you're exporting time series data, but the same goes for exporting tab files, WinSim files, and so on. Well, that's the flag system in Windographer. It's traceable, it's reversible, it's flexible. You can combine manual and automatic flagging in any way you wish. You can use manual flagging only, or you can use flag rules only. Use them both together in whatever order you like. You might, for example, execute some flag rules to catch most of the problems really quickly, and then when you have time to step through the data manually, you can do that and flag any bad segments that the rules might have missed, or unflag any good segments that the rules flagged incorrectly. Okay, I have 4 final points to make, if you're still with me. Number 1, we're going to take a closer look at flag rules. The rule we created a few minutes ago looked for a value equal to some number, but we can look for values greater than or less than a number, or changing more than or changing less than some value, or we can look for values inside some range or outside some range. I can click AND to add a second criterion, and a third and a fourth if I wish. So say I want to search for events in which the temperature is within some range. and the relative humidity is high, and the standard deviation of wind speed drops below some threshold, that might indicate icing. So I could make a rule to apply the icing flag to segments that meet those search criteria. But you can also search for the ratio of two data columns, say speed 80 meter A and speed 80 meter B, that ratio being greater than or less than some value or outside some range, or the difference between, or the absolute difference between two data columns. And when you switch to data column types, now you can search for the ratio of any anemometer to any higher or any lower anemometer, any co-located anemometer. That means at the same height above ground. So we have all these ands, but what about or? Can I write a rule to look for this or that? No, you can't, but you don't need to do that because you can write as many rules as you wish. If you want to apply flag X for reason 1 or reason 2 or reason 3, you can write 3 rules, where the first applies flag X for reason 1, the second applies flag X for reason 2, and the third applies flag X for reason 3. They all apply the same flag for different reasons. That's the same as reason 1 or reason 2 or reason 3. Icing is a good example of this, actually. Many of our users will write multiple rules to catch icing. One might search for flat lines in the speed data. One looks for frozen wind vanes. One looks for reverse wind shear, and so on. You can add rules to your favorites and then use them in all of your Windog files. So if you create a library of rules, you can access them very conveniently. So you can do a lot with flag rules. The online help system gives a lot more information, gives lots of examples, so please do hit F1. Number 2. The Inspect and Remove Flags window. It lists the flagged segments for some or all of the flags in some or all of the data columns. I can sort this list by column or flag or time or size. And if I double click on a segment, the graph jumps to show that segment. I can unflag particular segments, or unflag all segments in the list, or export the list, and I can see statistics on how many time steps are flagged by each flag, subdivided by year if I want, or month. Number 3, the document history window. It shows a record of all of the flagging and unflagging that we just did. It shows that Tom executed this flag rule at this time, and so on. Number 4, if you really want to delete problem data segments, you never have to do that, but if you really want to, the delete data window lets you do that. You can say to delete only those data points flagged with certain flags. This is something I would do only if I wanted to use the fill gaps window, for example, or for some really specific reason. Flagging, it's a beauty way to go.